always interesting. We're live. Amazing. We're back. Fantastic. How are we all? How is the band?
We're good. We're good. I brought my piano today.
Mark, there was such a pause then. I'm thinking, you had to think about that, didn't you? You really weren't sure.
I'm just disappointed that Mark didn't say he was grand and then reference the piano.
Boom. That was an opportunity wasted. I'm going to regret that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it'll come into the conversation at some point. But there we go. Hey, but I don't know, because it was end of July we were last together, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In this forum. But then it was quite quiet in August. But hey, look, we're now back. Very, very loud and very live and kicking. So all good, all good. We're talking about isolation and loneliness and all things to do with that. But I don't know, I was reading some. Hi, Orion. Lovely to have you join us. I was reading and I've got some rather scary stats. So apparently nearly 50% of adults, which is 26 million people, should you want to know that, have experienced varying degrees of loneliness, and 7%, 4 million in the UK, say they experience chronic loneliness.
Oh wow!
And the other fact that really surprised me was that, well, two things. One, it increases your mortality rate by 26%.
Yeah.
So I bet you didn't know that. And 62% of youngsters say that they lose confidence of themselves owing to loneliness. Hi, Nick.
Wow.
Sorry, I'm not entirely sure who LinkedIn user is. So apologies.
Yeah, it's one of the limitations of StreamYard, isn't it? If we had LinkedIn open, we could see who that was. But no, sadly, it comes through on StreamYard as a LinkedIn user. But yes, we are back, and hello.
Exactly. But I think these figures are pretty, I mean, wow. And loneliness is highest for 16 to 24-year-olds, female, single, widowed. But I don't know. I was quite astounded by some of those figures. And you're going to tell me, well, that's something you hear all the time with clients, etc. Or not.
I mean, yeah, Laura, it actually is. Just about every man I've worked with is feeling lonely and isolated in some way, shape, or form. And as I only coach men, I can only kind of speak to that. But what particularly happens to men is emotional isolation, Laura. Because especially our generation, we were brought up to bury and ignore, and that our emotions weren't anything we needed to understand or know about, that it was fluffy thinking. And so therefore, we're not very in touch with ourselves and with how we feel with our emotions, because we spend our lives ignoring them. So men end up emotionally isolated because they don't know how to talk about how they feel. They don't have the tools. They don't have the support groups. They don't have the networks. So we've kind of had this thing as men where it's been drummed, certainly for me, it was drummed into me for an early age, that we're supposed to tough it out, that we're supposed to endure. You know, even when times are tough, you're supposed to shoulder your burdens and just crack on and stiff up a lip and pull yourself together and all these sort of things, which we inevitably do. And then we end up feeling isolated because we don't realize that there are so many other people that feel the same way as we do. Mm-hmm. And we don't have the networks, the people to talk to, the ongoing communication with someone to go, do you know what? I feel like this. I feel anxious, or I feel overwhelmed, or I feel a bit down at the moment. I feel sad at the moment. And for someone to go, well, yeah, that's okay, mate. So do I. And I didn't. That's happened to me. And here's what I did to overcome it. And the weird thing is, in today's society, we probably communicate more than we've ever done. We've got more ways of communicating than we ever have. But yet, isolation and loneliness is a bigger problem than it's ever been. You know, those figures you read out there, Laura, are stark. And what I did know is that where you said about the effect it has on mortality. What I had read was some research on the countries where they have longevity is because they have community and because they have simple, straightforward lives. And the problem we have in the modern world is our communities have gone, or they've gone online, and we live such complicated, busy lives.
So true. It's like, if you look at, sort of like the blue zones, is it Dan, what's his name? Kuttner, who talks about the blue zones, and more specifically Okinawans of Japan. And you look at their, the percentage of those who've left or who are older is significantly higher than the rest of the world. And they put it down to, as you say, the community that they have. So because that's what keeps people going is community. We could be completely, I live right in the centre of town. If I walk out my front door, I use the term loosely because it's actually a side door. I can pretty much walk straight into my neighbour's, similarly, front door. And I don't think I've seen her for, a couple of months, because our days don't actually, we have our days are not aligned. What her world is revolving around one timetable, mine revolves around another. So we don't see each other. If I didn't live in the centre of town, that feeling of disconnection would be even greater. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Mark?
Well, I find it extraordinary that you can be in a stadium of 80,000 people and be the loneliest person in the world. And you can be sitting on your own on top of a mountain and feel connected to everything. So where does the loneliness come from? Where does it stem from? There's a huge part of it that it's in ourselves. And when we thought about community and I'm reading an awful lot of Hannah Arendt at the moment, the German Jewish philosopher from the last century, and she talks an awful lot about loneliness. Look, she's got very famous a few years ago with the rise of a certain leader in America and totalitarianism and that kind of thing. And she talked about how loneliness, and I can really see it as men get lonely and we begin to lose that connection with ourselves. We look for an ideology that allows us to feel that we're in a connection with something, and we can get dragged into the wrong community because of it. And that community can be, if we bring it back to the micro level, that community can be drinking in the pub every single evening, because even though it's not a community and it's a desperately lonely space to be, you feel like you're in that lonely space with a few other people in that lonely space without speaking about that loneliness. And I think on a larger scale, we buy into ideology because it's easier, because then we feel like we have something to care about, something to manage, something to work towards, because we've lost that connection to self. And the more distance we get from ourselves, then the lonelier we naturally get. Because if we can't be with ourselves, how can we be with anybody else?
Oh, I'm totally with you on that one, Mark. I think Nick's, but less quality of communications or less well-targeted comms. I think the biggest level of communication is with ourselves.
Absolutely.
We got so caught up, and it's to your point, Mark, we got so caught up in the noise of having to push harder, do more, be somewhere else. And that we, kind of bumbling along in that sort of fog, I guess. And actually, if we're not grounded in ourselves and connected to ourselves, actually, how can we show up and feel even vaguely connected to the world?
Yeah, and connection is the thing. This is the problem. This is why people are feeling isolated and lonely. The answer, what we were going to move on to a bit later, the integration. It's about connection, and that starts with yourself. And we live such busy lives these days that we don't even, as Nick point about the quality communication. We don't even have time to have some quality communication with ourselves, let alone with anybody else. So we're all coming from our minds, from our very busy, congested minds. We're not coming from our hearts, from our genuine core being. We're coming from our ego shells. So we're not making genuine, heartfelt, intimate connections with other people. And when I talk about intimate, I'm not just talking about, oh, look, my dog's here. I'm not talking about, just romantic relationships. I'm talking about all of our relationships. Our families are a bit more disparate these days. So we don't have those deep connections with our families that we used to. Even people we didn't like within our family, we still had a deep connection there. We still had an open line of communication. These things have all disappeared in the modern world. And we're spending all of our time communicating online, look, as we are now. And what's often missing from that is that energetic connection that humans are social animals. We want to be in tribes. We want to be in communities. We thrive when we collaborate. And that's an energetic thing. That's like a hive mind thing that goes on. And, as fantastic as it is that the three of us in completely different parts of the world and have this conversation with people from all over the world, that's fantastic. But we're missing that genuine face-to-face, proper human-to-human connection. And this is why we feel isolated and lonely. Firstly, because we don't know ourselves and we don't spend any time with ourselves. And then when we do that, because we don't know ourselves, we can't come from the core of our being. So we come from this created ego shell, this personality, what job we do, what car we drive, even our names, things that actually are quite meaningless and are just concepts, instead of our genuine being and connecting on that level.
No, I'm with you, Dan. I think it's that whole thing of, and equally, I think when I'm listening to you talk, then the place I went to is that it's not just about connecting with ourselves, but it's also the more we withdraw, it's almost like we're not using that communication, and I'm going to call it a muscle, for want of a better way of describing it. So the less we interact face to face and together, we don't get to use it. So we don't sense the differences in communication. And this really became apparent to me when I was talking with a local charity they're a mental health resource charity, but they're working with a youth outreach program, or created one. And they're saying to me, they're really young individuals who are like 6 and 7, whatever else, have lost the confidence through the pandemic to communicate and to confidently go out. So they're actually, taking them in groups to a coffee shop to collectively have more confidence to communicate with one another. And so you sort of sit there, they're going to nursery school, to primary school, and they're feeling isolated when actually they've almost got a ready-made community around them. So what of those people who are older in their lives who are, it's work and they come home and there's no one there? It kind of really makes the case for us having to step outside the door to force us to exercise that muscle called communication and connection. In
a very simple term, my mother lives down the country. It's probably only about 2 hours away. That's not even, it's an hour and 20 minutes. Okay. Life is busy. I've teenage kids and stuff like that. So how often do I get down? I'll be talking to her on the phone and say, oh, I'm going to go down to you this weekend. Although you don't need to come down. But I always say, but no, I want to see you. And as you're talking there, guys, I'm thinking about, when I'm saying I want to see you, I'm talking to you on the phone, like see you on a WhatsApp video call, but it is not the same as if I'm in the same room as you, breaking the bread, sharing that cup of tea and having that communication. And there's an organization that's probably one of the fastest growing organizations in Ireland. I don't know if you have the same organization. You probably have similar in the UK. It's called Men's Shed. Yeah. And it is for men over the age of, normally it started at over the age of 60, but it's getting lower and lower, where men can gather together and just do and be in community together, doing something. Because, men, we're kind of, we do it to ourselves, but we tend to be more isolated in our society because, you know, we can't reach out. We can't go up to someone and say, will you be my friend? You know,
the curse of self-reliance, Mark.
Yeah, because we can't do that. Like I had a post there about a year ago talking about that thing during November. Like, how many people have made a new friend? How many men in particular who are in their 40s or 50s have made a friend in the last 20 years? And it's striking how many their friends are still the couple of guys they grew up with or the couple of guys they went to university with, because we get to a point where we're kind of settled into ourselves and we're not ready to be that bit of more vulnerable to kind of break that barrier so that people can get in, they can know us, and they can go, you know what, and we never have to come to the point where we say, can you be my friend? But we'll say, can you meet up? Do you want to meet up and stuff, you know? And we learn that that's okay to do, you know? And it's extraordinary how, because we don't do that, we enter into older age, and who's left for us?
Sorry, Dan.
I was just going to say that, and your point was spot on, because what happens then, as Mark says, we stop making friends. We get used to doing all our communicating online, and this is what's happening to the younger generation. They're doing all their communicating on this. We lose the art of making those connections. We become socially anxious because we don't know how to do it anymore. We don't know. We forget how to make friends, how to talk to people without doing it through DMs or WhatsApps. Or
even with that, it's like last Saturday night, I was part of the policing patrol for my sister's eldest birthday party, and I went upstairs, and I kid you not, there was a row of kids. Kids. She'd probably kill me for calling her a kid, but anyway, there was a row of youngsters. And they were literally on their mobile phones. And I'm just kind of going, you're like even sat on a room and you're all on Snapchat or whatever it is.
Yeah, and they're probably talking to each other on Snapchat in that room.
We're becoming old people here, guys. We're becoming old people complaining about what young people do. Yeah. But that's their world. That's entirely their world. And it's not their fault. But it's not their fault. They were handed electronic devices at 3 years old, you know, and so they don't know anything different. And it's like, I often think of the most important job I probably ever had was we had a shop at home across the road from where I grew up in the country. My gran ran a country shop. And so from the age of 5 years old, it was attached to our house. The bell would go and you'd walk up to the counter and say hello and serve the person. So I spent my youth getting grounded in speaking and saying hello and talking to a random bunch of people who come in all the time. And I often talk about this with my brother. We often say, my God, we have to get our kids jobs in shops where they have to face people and speak to people, because it was an absolutely incredible skill to learn and a grounding to learn and to understand how people are, how different people are. I've seen some extraordinary things in that shop because of it. And that's a blessing. But unfortunately, they don't get that interaction because, you know, we've kind of pulled the ladder up a little bit on them.
Yeah. And so what is the key then in to start building that integration? You know, because I think you're right, Mark. I think there is an element of, you know, we've given them almost the tool. We gave them the mobile phone that they're now using to got themselves to that point. But what is it that we can do to start shifting that from being totally isolated? I mean, we've talked about trying to reconnect with ourselves. That's got to be one of the first things to stepping up.
Well, Carol mentioned in a comment there about the public lives that we live, you know, when we mentioned a little bit about vulnerability and stuff. And look, I'll just share, I put a post in this up a little while ago because it was such a startling experience that it's changed my thinking. And I know, Dan, you have a men's WhatsApp group itself. And I'm in a men's WhatsApp group. And it's not run by me. It's run by a couple of guys I know who run retreats and those kind of men-only retreats. And it was a Sunday evening, and one guy put a message up into it. And he just said in his message, and this took an insane amount of courage. He just said, lads, I'm struggling. I'm thinking of ending it. And like, you know, suddenly everyone was just, okay, what did he just say there? And suddenly everyone was reaching out to him, going out to him individually. People were trying to call him. And every single person then suddenly started sharing all these other stories of the challenges and the struggles they've had, of how low they have felt at times and where they are now. You know, and some of the guys, like one guy came on and put a video up and said, like, if you want to Google man on this bridge, that's me. That's me on that bridge. You'll find me. I'm on YouTube, you know, and just start telling his story. And that one bit of courage in a safe space allowed everyone else to be brave, to be open, to be themselves. And I'll give you a second version of the same thing. I was out with friends, and this is not as good as, not a positive story though. I was out with friends a couple of years ago, and we'd been out all day at a football match, and it was 11 o'clock that night. And so we weren't compass mentis at this point. And one of the lads starts mentioning how he's really struggling in his marriage, and he thinks it's over. And then the other guy starts sharing about he's been in therapy for years. Because we were so deep, so with alcohol, like then it was dismissive, it was nearly dismissed, and it wasn't the way we could approach it. They finally felt safe enough to speak about it. But then, the next day it became difficult to talk about because it was revealed at a time when people weren't able to speak about it, And it just goes to show you the different examples between the safe space and the feeling safe because you get away with it space.
And it's really true. And I think one of the things, is, and I dare say that, the whole alcohol, smoking, all that kind of stuff is filling an empty space because people don't like the space, the discomfort and the loneliness that is because they're not connected. So effectively it's avoidance, denial, all the rest of it. So they don't have to think about it. But there's something that, it's come up in loads of conversation. It came up in my meeting today. And that is the idea that, and I think Dan's WhatsApp group, you wrote a great post a couple of weeks ago about this, maybe a bit longer, but have we lost our ability to realise that we can do far more for ourselves than we actually realise to connect, to create things? So, Dan, the reason I reference you specifically is because you created the men's WhatsApp group because what you needed didn't exist. So you created it to create that connection. So, it was bigger than that, and I get that. But in essence, you created what wasn't there in order to drive connection and to integrate ultimately what you were doing and bring a number of people together to help them integrate too. But similarly, if I look at myself, I am surrounded. When I was with the local MP last week, he did say to me, "You're a bit of a glutton for punishment, Laura. You have no kids and you have arrived in Tunbridge Wells, only the town that is absolutely dominated by kids and schools and all the rest of it. You must be surrounded by kids." I said, "Yeah, but what I needed back then was different. I needed to be close to my family." But, what we would then had gone on to talk about was the fact that I was doing this voluntary work because I wanted to be connected, because I wanted to do things that got me into the community, that were around things that I am passionate about. So I created it for myself. I didn't, and very, crazily, an opportunity's come up to be the chair for the patient participation group for the local surgery. And so I went, yeah, okay, I'll do it because I want to get to know more people and to feel more connected. I know for me personally, because there's no one else to share the load with stuff, I have to find someone else's vehicle, as it were. So it's their patient participation group that by law they have to have. I'm just the chair. So I recognise how much I can commit to it, given I obviously have to do a whole lot of paperwork too. But I think sometimes, and this is where this conversation today was talking about, is that how many people, because we've isolated ourselves so much, we've lost our sense of what we can do, what we can find, what we can create in order to reconnect, to just get those steps started to build a momentum back.
Well, I think as well, Laura, we've lost out the sense of prioritizing that, of finding it important. It seems to have disappeared. We suddenly don't find it important to have these connections anymore. And I think from hearing what you were saying there, and from my own experience of creating the WhatsApp group, why did I create that group? Because I have awareness of myself. I know what I value, and one of the things I value is connection and honesty, right? So I wanted to create a place where there are other people that shared my values, right? That also want to connect, that also want to be honest, that want to have vulnerable conversations. That's why I did it, right? Because I want somewhere where I can open up to people. I live in the middle of nowhere, up in the Scottish hills. Now, I've done that deliberately. I love the peace and quiet, the tranquility. But F me, is it isolating sometimes? It really is, right? And I don't always want to put on to my wife, and she's not always here. Sometimes she disappears off for work for a couple of days. So I need somewhere where I can go, do you know what? I'm feeling a bit shit today. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed today, because running a business on your own is bloody overwhelming sometimes. So I need an outlet. I need some other people I know are just going to say to me, yeah, I've been there too, Dan. No, that's cool. Or anything I can help you with, Dan, or, and that's exactly what this WhatsApp group has turned into. But it started with self-awareness. It started with me knowing I want that connection. I want that group. I need it as a human being. I need to be part of something. I need to be part of something greater than me. I need to, I have a practice every day where I remind myself the things that are bigger than me that I'm part of. And part of that is the human family. I remind myself every single day I am part of the human family. I'm not just an isolated being on my own. And there are, depending on what you believe, there are varying degrees of things that are greater than us that we are part of. And I like to remind myself of that every single day, because I need to feel connected as a human being.
And that's really important. And you touched on a couple of words, and you mentioned it too, Laura, as well as dropping that the minister a couple of times. You just did notice that has been dropped in on a few occasions there. Yeah, we picked that up, right?
I wouldn't like to say anything at all.
That passion and that mission is so important. Like, when we're struggling with isolation and we're like, and lonely, and we forget what floats our boat. We forget what makes us tick. How do we touch back into the things that matter to us? How do we touch back into what's important to us? Like, you've got that group down because you care, because of self-awareness, and you want to be in that space. And then, so you're bringing your own passion into that space. I was working with a lady today, and she's struggling with the job that she's in, because she realized she's lost the passion in what she was doing. So it's not there for her anymore. And so she's becoming isolated at work because none of it matters to her anymore. And that's what happens to us in life, because we're not living to something that gives us that sense of meaning and purpose. And for Carol's sake, I know I have to mention nuns or monks, right? But I do have a nun story, would you believe? Because I'm currently reading a very interesting book called Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood, I think is her name. It's shortlisted for the Booker Prize. It's simply about a lady who goes to what is an order, a convent order, of just a few nuns, and starts staying there and continues to stay there. And what's I'm finding really interesting is she's looking for the isolation while also wanting to be part of community. So she's looking for the two things at the same time: the isolation to be able to be okay in that space, but in the community to know that if I'm not okay in that space, I have people with me. And I think, it's very powerful to see that that's what you gain from that space and from that commitment to the space. And it's also a lot of talk about sacrifice, because you have to, if you want to do certain things, then there's a sacrifice in that. And I think part of why, we communicate easy on these phone things, and, we go and we meet people in pubs, and we sacrifice ourselves for these easy ways of communication, these easy ways of being in the world, when really it's not easy, because it's just loading everything else back onto ourselves because of the isolation that we don't want, that we get out of it.
I think that's the whole thing, isn't it? I'm so glad that you brought in the nuns, though. Carl would never turn up again. But I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts are, Dan. I mean,
so we've got to understand ourselves and our drives and our passions, and ways in which we can collaborate and contribute to communities, whatever that is, whether that's a few people around us, whether that's voluntary work. But, Carl made the point in the comments. He said prolonged isolation could weaken our ability to nurture connection with others. It can also stimulate a fear of doing so. And that's the thing. We're social anxiety is at epidemic levels, because we've lost the ability to make those genuine connections. So all you can do is get out there and do it, is feel the fear and do it anyway. That's all you can do. Now, you can either create a space yourself, like I did, or you can do what Laura's done and go and join something. But it's knowing what lights you up. You know, what doesn't feel like work. Remove any resistance there that's in the way, that's stopping you from connecting with other people, whatever that is, whether that's things like fear or other horrible corrosive emotions like shame and fear of judgment and guilt and stuff like that. Whatever that is, do that bit of work on yourself, let that go, remove that barrier, and get out there and become part of a community. Even if it's only 3 or 4 people, that's still community. That's still, and it's about having deep connection. So once you know, what do I care about? What lights me up? Find some other people who care about the same thing that lights them up. And believe me, you will find a deep connection.
And look, and that's the connection in the right space. Like I was saying at the start about the danger of ideology, because we're lonely and we latch on to ideology so we don't have to think about things ourselves. There was a book written in 1780 or something called Journeying Around My Room. I think it was Javier de Mas, where he spent 40 days in his room. And in essence, he tried to sit with himself. And how many people can sit with themselves? I remember I did it last night. I put the book down. My phone was there beside me. I said, I'm just going to sit here for a couple of minutes. And I was itchy. I was like, oh God, no, I need to pick something up. I need to, it's amazing how we can't even just sit with ourselves for that little piece of time. Like, that's the perfect isolation if we can't be, which is where we need to then project that out. Well, what is it that will make me happy? Is not the right word, right? Because, happy is a search, is a chase. Like the American Constitution has the pursuit of happiness. Happiness isn't something you pursue. And if you go chasing happiness, then you can never catch it. It's always going to stay elusive and stay ahead of you. But it's much more about that sense of meaning, that sense of connection, that sense of purpose, that sense of well-being. That's what we're after. And when we find our way to touch back into those, then that's a world of difference. It's a brand new world we live in.
I can agree more with you. I think that's the key for me. And I think you could equally go, but what's that itch about? Rather than going, what's going to light me up per se, is like to actually explore what that itch is. What is the thing that's not allowing me to rest in that space? What is it that I need? What would take that itch away? Because I think back to your point about chasing happiness, you're never going to get happy because it's always going to be outside of reach. But, I think some people actually don't even know what that is anymore because they've been so caught in the noise of what society tells it is, that part of the loneliness, isolation is coming about because society says it should look a certain way. You're trying to fit into that certain way, whereas in actual fact, your version of it looks quite different. I've never been a conformist, funnily enough. I have struggled to fit in that place, and unsurprisingly, it just left me feeling more isolated because that wasn't my way. So, but yeah, it's a really, really challenging one because it is getting worse, and that is for sure. And I don't think there is an easy answer, but I think that it starts with ourselves taking accountability and responsibility for who we are, what we need for us, and what is really going to bring us to life. And look, to use the words of, and I always get it wrong, I think it's Howard Thurman, he says the world needs more people who come to life, and we come to life when we're connected.
Well said, Laura. And I think if I can bring it right back, and I know we're talking about getting out there and getting connected, okay, and finding those things and finding what you're passionate about and what interests you and what drives you, okay. I know that can be tough if because that can be here. I can't see my hand but some of us are way down here, and that's a big jump to get to there. And a part of that is the courage to just admit that we're lonely, and even if that's just admitting to ourselves, the courage to admit that we're lonely. That's a huge starting point, because from that space becomes the catharsis to go, well, then I can restart reaching out from this point. But it takes courage, and it takes maybe a little bit of vulnerability. But it's courage and vulnerability are very good things to have. So it's real strengths to have that you use to actually get to that space and to move forward from that space.
Yeah, it's
I'm totally with you. Sorry, Dan.
Sorry, Laura. I was just saying, it's understanding that vulnerability is actually its strength, to admit that, to be honest with yourself, and to be honest with other people. That use the words courage, Mark, and courage and strength, they go hand in hand, right? So it's not weakness to say, oh, I'm lonely, I'm struggling, I'm isolated. That's immense strength, and it's a great first step. I mean, just admitting that to yourself will automatically put you a few steps further up the ladder. You'll feel a lot better, and then you'll find when you tell other people that, you'll find they feel the same way too.
Yeah.
Absolutely spot on. Well, guys, I'm very conscious that Mark has to go and do his school. What is it? I know it's parents' evening or whatever it is. I don't know what they call it these days.
I have to suss them out for my young daughter, see if they're good enough for her.
Okay. Well, we must let you go, but we will be back the 24th of October. Topic TBC. But answers on a postcard if you have a particular, or drop us a message in the comments if you have a particular topic that you'd like us to,
or even better, meet us in person to tell us. Even better, meet us in person to tell us.
Exactly. That they're going to have courage to do that. But have a fabulous evening, and thank you everybody for joining us, and we will see you later this month. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Oh,
it's gone.